Imagine this. You're standing in an empty parking lot at dusk, the sky bruising purple as the last light bleeds out. Your shadow stretches long and thin ahead of you, but when you turn to leave, it doesn't pivot with your body. It lingers, just for a heartbeat, before snapping back into place. You tell yourself it's a trick of the fading light, but that night, in the bathroom's clinical glare, you catch it twitching at the edge of the mirror when you're perfectly still. At first, you dismiss it, fatigue maybe, a retinal ghost. But days later, you notice it again, on a crowded street where shadows swarm like ink blots. Yours pauses mid-stride, its edges quivering, while the others march on. Your breath catches. You spin around searching for a hidden projector, a prankster with a flashlight. Nothing. Just the mundane chaos of life. Strangers scrolling phones, pigeons pecking at crumbs, traffic humming. When you look down, your shadow has resumed its mimicry. That's when the question claws its way up your throat. What if it's always been this way? You begin to watch closely. In elevators, your shadow leans against walls you never touch. During meetings, it fidgets while you sit statue still. At midnight, when you lie awake, it pools at the foot of your bed like spilled oil, darker than the room's pitch. You try to outrun it, drive to a desert highway, sprint until your lungs burn, but it's there, stretching or shrinking, always present. Always watching. Here's the paradox. This thing is yours, a byproduct of your existence, a shape cast by your flesh. And yet, it defies you. It breathes when you hold your breath. It moves when you freeze. It carries secrets in its silhouette, contours that don't match your body, angles that can't be explained by light alone. You are its source, but you are not its master. What happens when the most intimate part of you operates beyond your control? This is not a ghost story. This is a mirror. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the parts of ourselves we bury. Shame, rage, desires we dare not name. But what if the shadow is more than a metaphor? What if it's a living echo of every choice you refuse to make, every version of yourself you've abandoned, a cumulative debt, paid not in money or time, but in unlived lives? Consider the weight. Every morning you choose a face to show the world, the good employee, the dutiful parent, the person who laughs at the right jokes, swallows the right opinions. But what of the faces you discard? The artist, the rebel, the lover? They don't vanish, they collect, they coagulate. They become the thing that dogs your steps, not to haunt you, but to remind you you are so much more than what you've allowed yourself to be. And yet, here's the trap. The shadow thrives on your blindness. The less you acknowledge it, the denser it grows. Nietzsche warned, "Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you." But what if the abyss isn't out there? What if it's here, woven into your silhouette, whispering through the cracks in your performance? You pace your apartment, heart drumming. The shadow mimics you, but its rhythm is off, a half beat ahead, like it's leading rather than following. You freeze. It freezes. You shout, "What are you?" It says nothing. It doesn't have to. Its silence is the answer. This is the great question. Are you the one casting the shadow, or are you the shadow of something deeper? You sit in a cafe, steam curling from your untouched coffee. The shadow is there, of course, bent over an adjacent chair like a patient companion. You've stopped flinching. Instead, you study it. This shape that knows your body better than your own mind does. But here's the truth you're beginning to grasp. The shadow is not the problem. It is the symptom. The real disease is the lie you've been fed since birth, that you are whole. Humanity's oldest wound is the fracture between who we are and who we believe we must become. Carl Jung called this split the persona, the mask we craft to survive a world that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. The shadow, he argued, is the psychic landfill where we dump every trait, desire, or impulse deemed unacceptable by society, family, or our own brittle self-image. But what Jung framed as a psychological inevitability, Friedrich Nietzsche saw as a spiritual crime. No one builds walls around a well, he wrote, only ruins. We wall off our depths, not because they're dangerous, but because we've been taught to fear what we might find there. Consider the machinery of modern life. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World warned of a society pacified by pleasure and distraction, but he missed the quieter tyranny, the cult of the optimized self. Productivity apps track your focus, social media algorithms sell you curated identities, and every advertisement whispers the same commandment: trim, tame, transcend. Become less human, more machine. The shadow swells in proportion to this amputation. Every time you silence a forbidden thought, I hate my job, suppress a primal urge, I want to scream, or abandon a dream, it's too late. You feed it. You think you're burying these fragments, but they are phoenixes. They rise, ash-coated and furious. Viktor Frankl, surviving the Holocaust, wrote that humans cannot avoid suffering, but can choose how to bear it. Yet modern existence has perverted this wisdom. We numb instead of confront, scroll instead of scream, buy instead of burn. Jean-Paul Sartre named this cowardice bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to escape the terrifying freedom of being truly alive. Your shadow knows this. It remembers the careers you didn't pursue, the loves you didn't fight for, the truths you didn't speak. It is the ledger of your unlived courage. But there's a deeper layer, one that chills the blood. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, argued that beneath our conscious minds rages a blind, insatiable will. A primal force that cares nothing for our happiness, only its own expression. Your shadow, then, is not just your discarded self. It is the will's puppet. It twitches with instincts older than civilization, rage that could topple empires, lust that would scorch marriages, creativity that might birth monsters or masterpieces. Society calls these forces dark, but in truth, they are neutral. You are the one who moralizes them into monsters. Here's the unbearable truth they don't want you to grasp. The shadow isn't chasing you, you're chasing it. Every time you choose the safe path over the meaningful one, the familiar face over the authentic scream, you widen the gap between the life you live and the life that hums in your bones. The shadow is the rift itself, a living chasm. It grows not because you're broken, but because you're more than what you've allowed yourself to be. And yet, this is the trap, the very systems that created the shadow profit from your fear of it. Governments want citizens, not visionaries. Corporations want consumers, not creators. Even love, or what we're taught to call love, often demands the euthanizing of our wildness. You've been gaslit into believing your darkness is the enemy, when in reality, it's the compass. The coffee goes cold, the shadow stretches languid and defiant across the cafe floor. You feel it now, the gravitational pull of the unasked question. What if the thing you've been running from isn't a curse, but a map? You buy a notebook. Black cover, blank pages. You start writing down the shadow's movements, when it flickers during your commute, how it elongates when you lie to your partner. But within a week, patterns emerge. It grows denser when you scroll through social media, thinner when you lose yourself in music. It recoils from compliments, but swells when you're alone, pressing against walls like a caged animal. You realize it reacts to everything you ignore. This is how the unseen operates, not with grand gestures, but through micro-betrayals. Cognitive scientists call it attentional blindness, the brain's ruthless triage system that filters reality into important and irrelevant. But what if the algorithm is rigged? Studies show that humans notice less than 0.1% of sensory input, prioritizing threats and rewards coded by evolution. Lions, yes. Broken bonds, no. Your shadow, it seems, lives in that 99.9%. It's a seismograph for the emotions you've numbed, the truths you've muted, the self you've cancelled to fit into elevators and Zoom calls. Consider the neurological cost. Every time you suppress an impulse, to quit, to kiss, to rage, your amygdala fires a distress signal. Cortisol floods your veins. The prefrontal cortex, that overworked bureaucrat, stamps the experience dismissed and shoves it into the shadow's domain. But the brain doesn't forget. Neuroplasticity ensures these buried moments carve neural pathways like rivers grinding through bedrock. Over years, this creates what psychologist Robert Sapolsky calls a democracy of pain, a brain hijacked by its own disowned fragments. You become a parliament of ghosts, each vying for control. Society, of course, depends on this fragmentation. Ancient kings had gods to enforce order. Modern systems have something far subtler: normalcy, the 9-to-5 grind, the 2-car garage, the curated Instagram life. These are not neutral choices. They're cultural scripts designed to keep the shadow in exile because a fractured self is a compliant one. You see it in the rise of polarization, political, social, spiritual. When individuals reject their inner complexity, they project it onto enemies. The racist becomes obsessed with purity. The workaholic despises laziness. The shadow, denied its rightful home, metastasizes into ideologies. But the most insidious consequence is time, not the clock on your wall, but your perception of it. Neurologist David Eagleman found that fear stretches seconds into lifetimes, while routine compresses years into blurs. Your shadow thrives in this distortion when you live on autopilot, repeating safe choices, swallowing your voice. The days bleed together, months vanish, decades collapse. The shadow, meanwhile, grows heavier, richer, older. It accumulates the weight of all the moments you refuse to inhabit fully. By midlife, many wake to find themselves stranded in a life that feels borrowed. Their shadow now, a leaden twin they drag behind them. Cultural conditioning weaponizes this. Fairy tales vilify wolves and witches, symbols of untamed instinct. Religions demonize doubt as heresy. Even self-help gurus preach killing your ego, unaware that the ego is not the enemy, but a terrified child trying to manage the shadow's chaos. The result? A world where people amputate their complexity to belong, only to find themselves half alive, haunted by the sense that something is missing. But here's what they won't tell you. The shadow isn't stealing your life. You're donating it. Every time you choose distraction over introspection, approval over authenticity, you feed the void. Behavioral economist Daniel Kahneman calls this the focusing illusion, the delusion that what consumes your attention defines your existence. But the shadow knows better. It thrives in the background, the periphery, the liminal spaces between thoughts. It is the silence beneath your Spotify playlist, the itch you can't scratch during meditation, the face that flickers in dreams but dissolves by dawn. You close the notebook. The shadow pools at your feet, ink black and infinite. For the first time you sense its true nature, not a stalker, but a scribe. It has been recording everything, the jokes you censored, the tears you swallowed, the love letters you burned. It is the archive of your unlived self, and it's growing impatient. You try to destroy it. At 3 a.m., you drag a box of childhood relics into the backyard. Diaries, trophies, love letters yellowed with age. You strike a match. The flames devour paper, melt plastic, turn photos to smoke. The shadow dances in the firelight, not shrinking but expanding, drinking the heat. You scream, "What do you want?" It curls toward you, a serpent made of ash, and whispers without words, "Burn brighter." Rebellion begins here, not in defiance of the shadow, but in alliance with it. History's greatest revolutionaries understood this paradox. Van Gogh didn't fight his madness. He let it starry night his canvases. Frida Kahlo painted her pain until it became a language. Nietzsche, syphilitic and half-blind, wrote his masterpieces in the volcanic dark of his collapse. They didn't transcend their shadows, they weaponized them. Your shadow isn't a flaw to fix, it's raw material, a nuclear core. The art of liberation lies not in outrunning it, but in learning to split its atoms. Start with this heresy. Stop trying to heal. Carl Jung's greatest insight wasn't about integrating the shadow, but about realizing that integration is impossible. The shadow is pure gold, he said, not because it can be refined, but because it is currency. The goal isn't to fix yourself, but to negotiate with the darkness. Begin each day as a diplomat. Sit with your shadow over black coffee and ask, what will you take in exchange for your power? History offers blueprints. When the samurai practiced mushin, mind without mind, they entered battle empty of fear, desire, even self-preservation. Their shadows led the sword strokes. When Buddhist monks chant in the Himalayas, they don't seek to silence their inner chaos. They let the wind carry their voices until prayer and storm become one. These are not metaphors, they're manuals. The modern world will call this madness. Psychology peddles self-improvement, but true transformation is not about becoming better. It's about becoming alchemical. Turn shame into fuel. Let regret be the ink for your manifesto. When the shadow twitches with repressed rage, don't meditate, dance. Stomp until the neighbors call the cops. Screw their approval. You're not here to be palatable. You're here to catch fire. Here's the first practical spell. Amplify the shadow until it becomes absurd. Writer Franz Kafka trained himself to write through insomnia, panic, and tuberculosis by leaning into his dread. You must hold chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. Next time your shadow pulses with anxiety, feed it. Write down every catastrophic fantasy. Let it escalate, losing your job, living under a bridge, eating rats. By page 3, you'll laugh. The shadow hates ridicule. It thrives on your seriousness. Second, seek sacred disobedience. In 1942, philosopher Simone Weil starved herself in solidarity with Holocaust victims, turning her body into a protest. You needn't go that far, but find one daily ritual that defies the machine. Wear mismatched shoes to the boardroom. Tell a stranger your darkest secret. Mail a love letter to your teenage self. The shadow craves authenticity, not virtue. Third, rewrite your origin story. Neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga proved that the brain's left hemisphere spins narratives to explain our actions, post hoc fairy tales we call identity. But what if you hijack this? Every night journal from your shadow's perspective. Let it narrate your day. She smiled at her boss while I plotted arson. He said, "I'm fine, but I carved help into the frost." Over time, the voice shifts. The shadow stops accusing. It starts collaborating. The breakthrough comes when you realize the shadow isn't your enemy, it's your immune system. Just as fever burns infection, the shadow's disruptions are attempts to purge the lies you've swallowed. When it claws at your peace, it's saying, "This life is too small, tear it open, you test this, quit the job that numbs you, sleep with the lights off, let the shadow flood the room." At first, terror, then a curious intimacy. The shadow isn't a separate entity. It's your unlived life demanding embodiment. Jean-Paul Sartre was half right. Hell isn't other people. It's the versions of yourself you've left in the vestibule, pounding to get in. One midnight, you stand naked before the mirror. The shadow wraps around your torso like a lover, seeps into your pores. Your reflection blurs. When it clears, you're different. Not fixed, but fused. The face in the glass is both stranger and more familiar than anything you've seen. You feel the weight lift, not because the shadow is gone, but because you've stopped fighting gravity. The rebellion isn't a battle, it's a wedding. You wake to sunlight, not the diluted glow of dawn, but noon's full-throated roar. The shadow is gone, or rather, it's everywhere. It soaks the walls, the bedsheets, your upturned palms. You panic, scrambling to the mirror, but your reflection stops you cold. There is no shadow behind you. There is no you in front of it. The division has dissolved. This is the ultimate truth. You were never separate. All your life you believed in the hierarchy of light. That illumination meant safety, clarity, control, that shadows were the scraps reality left behind. But physics tells a different story. Light moves. It chooses. Photons decide their path only when observed, existing in superposition until forced into a singular reality. Your shadow was never a passive stain. It was the record of light's decisions. A ledger of all the paths not taken. What if consciousness works the same way? For decades, quantum biologists have whispered about microtubules in brain cells, structures that might harness quantum vibrations. Crackpot theory or not, the metaphor holds. Every thought you've censored, every impulse you've denied exists in a superposition. The shadow wasn't your enemy. It was your multiverse. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "We are our choices," but he missed the corollary. We are also the choices we refuse. The artist you abandoned at 23 paints in a parallel timeline. The lover you walked away from builds homes in the quantum foam. The scream you swallowed becomes a hurricane over an unseen ocean. These aren't fantasies, they're the shadow's curriculum vitae, proof that every disowned self persists, vibrating at frequencies your fear muted. Here's the paradigm shift. You are not a being. You are a threshold. The human nervous system processes 11 million bits of information per second. Consciousness acknowledges 50. For your entire life, you've mistaken that narrow bandwidth for reality. But the shadow was the 10,999,950 bits, screaming for recognition. The grief that could have leveled cities. The joy that might have ignited supernovas. The rage that should have forged new gods. You called it darkness because the light you used was too dim to see by. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy argued that meaning comes not from circumstance, but from response. But what if meaning is the shadow's mother tongue? The language it uses to say, this pain is not a prison, it's a bridge. Walk it. You step outside. The sun hangs high, merciless. A child runs past, their shadow darting like a dolphin. You watch it merge with yours. No, yours merges with theirs. The boundaries were always imaginary. Jung's collective unconscious, Nietzsche's will to power, Schopenhauer's primal will, they all glimpsed fragments of this truth. The shadow isn't personal, it's ancestral. It's the sum of every human who ever stifled a truth, every civilization that chose chains over chaos, every star that collapsed to birth new light. You finally understand the vision in the mirror. The shadow didn't vanish, you became permeable. The parts you exiled, the coward, the tyrant, the heretic, now flow through you like wind through a dead tree's branches. They don't belong to you, you belong to them. This is the revelation that unshackles Einstein's ghost. Time is an illusion. The past isn't fixed, the future isn't linear. Both are raw materials waiting to be sculpted by the shadow's hands. Every time you touch an old wound, you're not revisiting history, you're editing it. The child who cried in a dark room still cries, but now you are the adult who sits beside them. The lover who left still walks away, but now you are the door they exit through. The shadow isn't memory, it's agency. So where does this leave you? In a world that worships the myth of the atomic self, the lone genius, the self-made hero, this truth feels like annihilation. But annihilation is the door. Hindu mystics knew this. Shiva's dance destroys worlds to make space for new ones. You are both dancer and dance. The ultimate rebellion is surrender, not to the shadow, but to the understanding that you were always its equal collaborator. Every lie you told carved its face. Every truth you spoke gave it voice. The relationship wasn't parasitic. It was symbiotic. You built each other. As the sun dips, you notice something new. Your shadow returns, but altered. It has your mother's shrug, your first lover's laugh, the stride of the person you'll be in 10 years. When you move, it moves. Not behind, but beside. Not a follower, but a companion. You realize this is how it's meant to work. The shadow isn't a defect. It's a covenant, a pact between the seen and unseen, the spoken and unspeakable, the lived and the imagined. To reject it is to live half a life. To embrace it is to become infinite. The streetlights flicker on. You walk home, 2 sets of footsteps echoing, not master and slave, not prisoner and guard, just travelers sharing a road that unwinds forever in both directions.